Welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your lunch, feeling refreshed and energized for this afternoon session. So let us now begin session 2 of the 18th Seoul ODA International Conference. Now, session 2 will be focusing on the development finance and partnerships, approaches to mobilization, alignment, and coordination. This session will be preceded by Professor Kyung Park from KAIST. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator and speakers with a big hand. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. 반갑습니다. I hope you had a very good lunch together. So it's a great honor to welcome you all to this wonderful session titled Development, Finance and Partnership. My name is Kyung. I'm a faculty member of Graduate School of Science and Technology Policy in KAIST. I'll be your moderator for this session. So indeed, over the past years, actually, we have a lot of challenges in terms of development finance, as well as a lot of other issues, including climate change and man-made disaster, and also the political disruption as well. So there are many ongoing issues in terms of how we can actually manage and how we can attract more development finance, etc. So in this year, we have been preparing this session within this kind of context and discuss the challenges and opportunities of development finance. So that actually lays foundation for today's discussion with the panelists from different perspectives. So in this session, we particularly focus on three things: mobilization of development finance and alignment, how we can actually align to the demand in a recipient country, and also coordination. There are lots of stakeholders in how we can actually work together. So we discuss the opportunities and challenges in development finance, and we try to learn from each other by sharing best practices and hands-on experiences from our wonderful panelists. So I'm really excited to introduce our wonderful group of distinguished speakers. We have a very good mixtures of the panelists with us today, because we have one from the development agencies from the Global North, and also two specialists from the Global South, and also international organization, and also the private sector. So thank you very much for your participation once again. So I'd like to introduce briefly our panelists from right next to me. Aabo, Senior Advisor, Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, Norad. Let's give a round of big applause. And Alejandra Vela, Executive Director of AMEXCID, Mexican Agency for International Development Cooperation. And Noela Crespo, Executive Director of Peruvian Agency for International Cooperation. And Tim Strawson, Team Lead from UNDP. And lastly, Clubb, Managing Director of Convergence Blended Finance. So we are already running out of time. So without further delay, let me start with Aabo. So floor is yours. So let's go to the podium. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all today. I hope you enjoyed lunch and are ready for the second half of this session. We're very excited for this one. A little closer? Okay, good. These type of meetings, I find them very exciting, and I'm very excited to be asked to join here and come and speak to you guys. And I think maybe just now more than ever, it's very important that we do come together and discuss these topics. And these type of meetings are just an opportunity for us to come and like share experiences, build solidarity together, and also to learn from each other. And just before the session started, my colleague Alejandra, she said, I want to work with Norway. Perfect. This is that type of platform that these type of convenings are all about, partnership. And so hopefully today gives that opportunity to you guys too, and grab someone. It's like, let's partner together and let's work together. That's what these type of meetings are all about. So success will only depend on, or is dependent on how we as donors, as governments, representatives from the private sector and other institutions, how we can join forces together and pool our resources, align our interests. That's how we can see success. So today I wanted to share focus on a partnership journey that we have been on for the past few years, and share some of the lessons learned from that experience on what was working, where those limits were for us, and how we can deliver scale. So I'll be talking about the FASA fund, and that is an acronym that stands for Financing Agri-SMEs in Africa. And hopefully this could be a bit more of a practical example on what we have been talking about today, and we'll be talking about for the rest of the day as well. So this initiative started as a brainstorming activity between us in Norad and a very large multinational agribusiness. And we wanted to make a big play in agriculture transformation together. We wanted to have a tangible impact on the smallholder farmer, but we wanted to help them get more access or better access to finance, to markets, to information, technology, innovation, etc. But maybe more specifically, we wanted to help drive the agriculture economy, or help accelerate the agriculture economy in Africa. Increase production, increase efficiency, etc. So, let me sorry, next slide, there we go. So, but us kind of working in this particular field, we know it's very, very costly to work directly with the farmer. If we want to impact millions of farmers, it's hard to do that directly. If not impossible, and it takes an immense amount of resources. So us working in the field, we know we need the entry point to be the agri-SMEs. That is the important connector, that nexus or link between the farmer and the market or the consumers, us. One of those big problems to kind of unlock that potential is inadequate access to finance. That is a big barrier to growth for these businesses that are driving, really the driving force of the economy. So if we do want to make any big kind of advancements in food security, especially in Africa, or improve the food system, or even more broadly, reduce poverty, we have to work through these ag-SMEs. We cannot avoid it, and from us from a donor, it's a must and critical that we focus on them. So this was our starting point when we had this kind of brainstorming activity with this large multinational company. So we just explored a lot of different options, but we couldn't quite agree on a common approach. We wanted a vehicle We wanted a tool that could have a huge impact or make a big dent in this big financing gap, but also have that tangible impact on the farmer. Our partner had a little bit of a different approach. They wanted a bit more geographic specific focus, focus more on certain type of value chains. But that didn't necessarily mean that one approach was better or worse, or one approach was wrong or right. It was more that we just had a difference in ambition and vision. So we decided not to partner. Instead, we continued iterating on this ourselves and explored other type of partners. So this brings me to my next slide, and we knew that private business and private capital would be a very kind of key to the whole kind of development agenda, and would be key for us to also partner with. So we know that we need to be a bit smarter, more strategic in how we also apply our resources, and specifically for us in Norad, our grant resources. And we in Norad, we've gone through a bit of an evolution in this area over the past few years. We have been traditionally provider of grants for technical assistance and capacity building, but that is challenging if we want to achieve kind of big scale and mobilize capital at big scale. So now it is more about mobilizing capital, attracting private investors, crowding in private sector, sharing risk. And us donors, we do have actually a very unique role to play there, because the resources that we have available, grant resources, doesn't necessarily require that 10, 15, 20% return on investment, but we have different type of priorities, and we can take a much higher risk and share that risk with investors. So we have that ability to be catalytic and de-risk. So that's the direction where we are moving now. And catalytic capital or blended finance, it is not always additional in every sector and industry, but in the agriculture sector, it is. That is a sector that is perceived as very high risk, and is good use of blended finance. So it's a good area for us to use our funding for. And also for investors, it's all very often a prerequisite for investing in that sector, that they have some type of de-risking. And the demand, as you can imagine, is massive for this type of funding. There's lots of investors that want to invest in this sector, but they need some de-risking. And also, investment funds in particular, we know are a preferred channel for private capital that wants to invest. Now I'm talking about like private equity or private debt or venture capital type of funds. They provide a set of financing that banks generally do not provide. So what we donors are increasingly focusing on is providing them the right tools to invest and help grow and scale these type of businesses. So providing catalytic capital, blended finance, first loss, junior equity, or whatever you want to call it, it's not necessarily new. Like us donors, we've been doing this for some time, but the problem has been fragmentation. silos, lack of collaboration. And the result has been like undercapitalized funds and inefficiencies in the kind of capital supply for us providers of that, and that lack of scale. So that is why we established FASA. And that was meant to be a joint platform, a common platform for us donors to provide that blended finance, that catalytic capital to investment funds that invest in agriculture in Africa. That didn't exist for us. We didn't have a good vehicle to engage with those funds. So how it works, it's quite simple. If that diagram is confusing, we're not going to go into all of it, but I'll try to break it down simply. Basically, what FASA is it's a fund, a multi-donor fund, where we sovereign donors can pool our resources together. So we came together with the US, Korea, and the UK to provide capital to FASA that can invest this catalytic capital to these investment funds. The whole idea is that that will reduce the risk and allow these other investors to come in. So it's a way of crowding in new sources of capital. And this is what it's all about. We can use our resources a bit more strategic, a bit more smarter to unlock much bigger sources of capital. Moving on, FASA has probably done one of the most extensive exercises of mapping what the capital supply is for kind of ag finance in Africa, and for investment funds in particular, it's about $4 billion. And this is quite significant. We're talking about trillions too, but when we're talking about agriculture in Africa, it's a little bit of a different scale. And particularly when we're talking about SMEs, it is at a smaller scale, but these numbers are still very significant in that context. So what FASA is trying to do is plug some of this gap. And with the current size of FASA, we're starting out with about $85 million now. And that is just starting. We're just starting with this. And that obviously can leverage 3, 4, 5 times as much funding. So the ambition is obviously to grow this. So we're just getting it started, now deploying, but building on that momentum. We're continuing to approach other partners because we have a much bigger vision and a bigger ambition to scale this up. I'll end on this slide here and just share a little bit about what our kind of success factors were in setting this up. And I think maybe first and foremost, and maybe most importantly, what was key to us was that we had a shared objectives and a shared vision. And this is where we derailed with our first partner in the beginning, this multinational agribusiness. We just had different interests in mind. But having a shared vision, that is key when you're creating these type of partnerships. I'll just hit just a couple more of these points, and maybe trust, and I probably should have also said patience in there too. But building trust takes a very long time. This type of partnership, it took like 2-3 years for us to build, but now we're partners for the foreseeable future. This is not necessarily just like a short-term project that we're setting up, but we're going to be partnering with these partners now for a very long time. But it takes time to build these type of partnerships. And then the last point that is also kind of a key success factor for us is that you have a collaborative type of governance. I've seen in a lot of these type of governance structures, they could be very kind of strict and set. But if you have a bit more of some flexibility and where you can have a collaborative process, that is more of a recipe for success. When people can come together and co-create, then you create so much more ownership to these type of partnerships, and they become so much more stronger. So I'll end on that note and say very much thank you, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anders. I think you greatly set the stage. So you share some of the challenges, including silos and fragmentations and inefficiencies in coordination mechanism. But at the same time, you provide a very impressive one slide in terms of collaboration mechanisms in FOSSA. Number one is it includes not only just government agencies and development finance actors, but also you try to just include the small scale holders and the workers and SMEs, etc. And also the consumer side. I think that's very impressive. And then second one is that with the international actors, like other donors, you show the complex but seemingly very promising dynamics for future collaboration mechanisms. So I think I like those two, the point of view. And then let's move quickly to Alejandra. So floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I respectfully read out all those present and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Professor Park Young, thank you, and thank you all of you. Please receive greetings from the President of Mexico, Ms. Claudia Sheinbaum. Mexico is experiencing a historic moment. We are not only undergoing a change of government, but it also witnessing a dawn of new era. We have the first woman president in North America, Claudia Sheinbaum, the first woman scientist to successfully lead a nation. In these times, we face an important challenge: to be creative in matters cooperation to break with inertia. Promotive cooperation which truly transforms reality to touches people's lives, individuality and collectively. One of our guiding principles in Mexico foreign policy is Mexican humanism, which places people in the center of all international action. These principles stems for formation as independent nation and reflects the aspiration of Mexican people. It is a great honor to take part of this important dialogue and to share Mexico's perspective of how South-South and triangular cooperation can contribute a financial architecture that supports more inclusive development. We meet a pivotal moment to shape the financing for development agenda to begin with Monterrey Convention in 2002, continue with the Addis Ababa Action Agenda in 2015, and most recently, advance at the Sevilla Conference of Financing of Development. This process reminds the international community that resources indeed exist, but their redistribution remains inequitable. We issue an urgent call to transform the global financial architecture to make it more just, responsible, and inclusive, and align public and private capital with its sustainable development goals. We recognize the host country, the Republic of Korea, as an inspiring example. In just a few decades, it moved from being a net recipient of international aid to become a member of the OECD Development Assistance Committee. This reflects the power of solidarity, perseverance, and long-term vision. South-South, triangular, and circular cooperation can and must serve as catalysts for financing that force more inclusive and transformative development. Mexico joined this conversation as an upper middle income country with a dual vocation. We are both recipients and providers for international cooperation. This duality strengthens Mexico's conviction that South-South, triangle, and circular cooperation is not only an effective mechanism to mobilize resources, but also a guarantee of inclusive cooperation, cooperation that is effective, adaptable, and innovative. For Mexico, cooperation goes a step further. is not merely about transferring resources. It is about mobilizing and aligning public and private capital, national and international, through multi-actor and multi-level partnerships. This means that governments and the private sector, civil society, academia, and local authorities co-create solutions and share risks. Our commitment is fully aligned with the principles of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, country ownerships, result orientation, inclusion, transparency, and mutual accountability. Guided by the principle of Mexican humanism, we demonstrate that in Mexico, we extend a helping hand, we are supportive and fraternal, because solidarity is part of our very essence. In this effort, Mexico's Sustainable Finance Mobilizing Strategy, led by the Ministry of Finance, has identified a financing gap of 3.6 trillion pesos by 2030 and aims to mobilize to 15 trillion pesos through 3 pillars. 1, sustainable public financial management. Second, mobilization of sustainable financing. And the third, cross-cutting actions for sustainability, such as gender equality and biodiversity. To institutionalize this multi-actor vision, AMEXCID create 3 technical councils this year. The first one is the Business Council to engage the private sector in the design of financial international projects. The second one is the Social Council to link civil society organizations to the design and implementation of cooperation programs. And the third one is the Children's Council, a unique space giving voice to children in the international agenda. These councils are an innovative bridge to attract resources, knowledge, and the will of non-traditional actors, enhancing the effectiveness of financing. I'm gonna show you our first case of Mexican illustrative international cooperation. Internationalization of our social programs. An example, thank you, Sembrando Vida, Sowing Life, is a flagship program that strengthens food security and increases agricultural production through agroforestry, biofactories, and sustainable practices, providing both cash and in-kind support with technical accompaniment. It has been successfully implemented in Central America, Cuba, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, and also with Cuba in the Caribbean, as an innovative financing model to combines Mexican public resources with international contribution and local technical cooperation. And the other program is Jóvenes Construyendo el Futuro, Youth Building the Future, program that provides job training to thousands of young people and countries such as El Salvador and Honduras, using co-financing schemes that blend Mexican budgetary resources with international cooperation. For example, we start with our resources, and then KOICA, TICA, starts with us in the second phase. These programs show that Mexico's social policies can become South-South cooperation instruments to channel resources, build capitality, and offer alternatives to forced migration. And the second case is a regional management of sargassum in the Caribbean. A second example of Mexican regional initiative for the sustainable use of sargassum, a resources that can be turned into biofertilizer, biodegradable packing bricks, biogas briquettes, and residual fertilizers. The initiative includes, first one, satellite monitoring. The second one, operation of collection vessels. Third one, sargassum shredding and desalination system. The fourth one, biodigestion system. And the fifth one, wastewater treatment plants. Sargassum threatens biodiversity, tourism, and public health in the Caribbean. Mexico seeks, and in partnership with regional and international actors, the design to innovate approach that transforms the environmental crisis into a development opportunity by financing. The innovative instruments such as sustainable bonds and blended finance to attract private capital, installation of pilot biorefineries to convert sargassum into biofertilizer and bioenergy, a regional scientific cooperation to reinforce research and development, and the community participation to generate green jobs and sustainable livelihoods. This initiative demonstrates how the blue and circular economy can be scaled through cooperation, turning an environmental threat into regional sustainable development. And the third case, for me, is very important to show you because it's the MICTA project in Acapulco. Finally, I share a project carried out with our MICTA parents, Mexico, Korea, Indonesia, Turkey, and Australia. The rehabilitation of a public school, René Juárez Cisneros, infrastructure in Acapulco, Guerrero, following the damage caused by the Hurricane Otis in 2033. This effort mobilizes resources from 5 countries, as well as local authorities, civil society, illustrating circular cooperation where traditional donors, emergency economies, and community actors converge in a common goal. This school intervention demonstrates to the world the power of nations united in solidarity. Cooperation builds trust, generates solutions in time of adversity, and transforms local realities. Mexico's experience demonstrates that South-South and circular cooperation can mobilize development financing when a solid nation strategy exists, such as the MFCS, that integrates sustainability into public finances, innovate instruments such as blended finance, green bonds, and sustainable taxonomies are promoted, and the importance of non-traditional actors is recognized through technical councils and international art programs connecting to the global to the local. According, Mexico proposes 3 priorities. The first one, strengthen the international financial architecture, tripling the leading capacity of multilateral development banks and promoting debt relief. The second one, recognize middle-income countries as bridges between the global north and south, key to scaling regional projects. And the third one, scale up sustainable investment, aligning public budgets, capital markets, and international cooperation with projects that deliver social and climate impact. Mexico stands ready to work hand in hand with all our partners to transform global challenge in opportunities, generating sharing prosperity and mobilizing financing that changes reality to the local level upward. Mexico projects its humanist value aboard as an expression of our commitment to building a more hopeful future based in respect, in human dignity, solidarity, and international cooperation. And our next partner is going to be Norway. Thank you so much for being here and for letting me show you the successful international cooperation of Mexico. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. So international development community increasingly has recognized the significant roles of middle-income countries as a bridge between North and South. So I think that Alejandra's talk is very timely. Also, you raise very important questions, which is how can we attract non-traditional actors? That's, I think, a fantastic point, which we can further learn from our next speaker. So, Noela, are you ready? So, podium is yours. So, I'd like to invite Noela. So, let's give him. So, for the panelists, I think you have Spanish translations. So I think you can use that. And for the audience, 한국어, 스페인어, 영어로.
Korean and Spanish interpretation will be provided.
Muy buenas tardes.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea and KOICA for giving me this opportunity to be part of this meaningful event and to share my experiences, ideas to all of you. Thank you once again for inviting me to this event. And as Executive Director Alejandra mentioned, that the most critical element is South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. And she made good points. And today, I'd like to highlight the role of international technical cooperation in Peru. So, international technical cooperation is a part and component of foreign policy, and it shows our dual role as both the recipient and a provider of technical cooperation. And what I want to emphasize specifically is that this complements our national development efforts as well. And currently, Peru has established and implemented national policy on international trade technical cooperation to 2030. And with that policy, we'd like to establish ourselves as a provider of technical cooperation in Latin America and the Caribbean and other regions. And we want to promote ourselves as a reference in international development cooperation, as well as a best practice model. And we understand the Global South very well, so that's why I believe our international technical cooperation is important. And our technical cooperation aims to position ourselves as a reliable partner for development. And that should be in line with the principles of horizontality, mutual benefit, and complementarity. And second, our cooperation targets to contribute to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the Financing for Development Agenda, consistent with our international commitments. And third, with our technical cooperation, we want to foster innovative partnerships and synergies with our partners and multiple development stakeholders and actors in strategic areas. And next is South-South cooperation. In 2024, as of 2024, Peru has participated in 83 projects with 15 partner countries. Of that total, for more than half of those projects, Peru, served as a provider for technical cooperation. And in other projects, we worked as a dual player, as a provider and recipient. And also, all those projects have been led, managed, and financed by APCI. And allow me to talk about the outlook of the Peruvian technical cooperation offer. APCI, or APCI, has recently signed an MOU with Singapore to foster cooperation initiatives. And in addition to that, we established a similar agreement with Commerce Portugal, targeting Africa. Indeed, when it comes to global South development, Global South is the one that understands the development needs and priorities of its partners. And let me talk about triangular cooperation. Peru, works with priority sectors like water resource management, disaster risk management, renewable energy resources, science, technology, and innovation. These are main areas for our action. And our strategic partners include Spain, Germany, Japan, and the Pan-American Health Organization, or PAHO. And we, Peru, want developed countries and international organizations to strengthen triangular cooperation and to use it as a tool for development partnership to support triangular cooperation. And please play this video clip. Please play this video clip with sound.
In the world, technical cooperation is key for tackling global challenges. Peru shares its best practices with the world through the Peruvian Technical Cooperation Offer, OPCTI. Under the framework of South-South cooperation led by the Peruvian Agency for International Cooperation, APCI, along with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. APCI coordinates the Peruvian Technical Cooperation Offer, contributing to the development of other nations in accordance with the National Policy of International Technical Cooperation to 2030, Peru's Foreign Policy and Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, of the 2030 Agenda. A key tool for APCI's cooperation management is the catalog of the Peruvian Technical Cooperation Offer. This document brings together the best experiences and knowledge that Peru shares with the world. The 2025 to 2026 edition presents 50 successful experiences from 28 Peruvian institutions to share with the world. The goal is to work together towards a more sustainable and inclusive development. In recent years, Peru has become one of 4 countries with most South-South cooperation initiatives and the second Ibero-American country with the most initiatives in the post-pandemic period. More than 80 projects have connected Peru with the world. In 2025, we will implement over 30 new cooperation activities in Latin America and the Caribbean, and projecting to Asia and Africa, promoting innovation, knowledge, and common good. Our catalog offers expertise across 8 key sectors: climate change, forests and biodiversity, water sanitation and water resources, disaster risk management, sustainable cities and transport, citizen security and organized crime, health and food security, technological innovation, ICTs and value chains, education, inclusion, and gender equality. Cooperation actions include exchange of experiences, courses, internships, seminars, and more, delivered in both in-person and virtual formats for our partners worldwide. Some of the most notable offerings include Ocenfor, Forest Backpack, a participatory and intercultural tool for sustainable forest management and preventing illegal logging. Senfotour, Gastronomy of the World. Gastronomy and tourism capacities were strengthened through exchange of experiences between Peru and El Salvador. Minstour, Charming Towns, a model of sustainable tourism. INEA, Good Agricultural Practices for Potato Cultivation and Processing. Imarpe, research on selective and environmentally friendly fishing techniques. Regional Government of Amazonas. It stands out as the first regional experience with the participation of the Regional Government of Amazonas in promoting decentralized South-South cooperation. With the catalog of the Peruvian Technical Cooperation Offer, we reaffirm our commitment to South-South and triangular cooperation, promoting the exchange of knowledge for a better world. Download our Peruvian Technical Cooperation Offer catalog and let's start sharing successful experiences. Peru, country generating international technical cooperation.
Además,
So I have just showed you some successful cases through a video clip, and allow me to share some more successful cases and best practices. And this is a project experience that we have had with Belize. So with this cooperation project, we were able to assess archaeological sites in Belize, and we were able to explore them, discover them, and we were able to improve the preservation process of those sites and heritage. And next, we worked with Bolivia for technical cooperation. Through this project with Bolivia, quinoa, amaranth, tari, we helped them manage sustainable crops like them, and we were able to help them improve their capabilities. And also, we developed training methodologies adapted to local needs and people. And allow me to touch upon another important element. I'm going to talk about our reflections following Seville FFD4. In light of the fourth FFD, I'd like to talk about, from an international cooperation perspective, to talk about some recommendation and reflections on the implementation of Seville commitment. Of course, Seville commitment includes many parts, but I'm going to focus on technical cooperation. And if you look at the agreement of Seville commitment, you can see it's crucial to establish a follow-up mechanism for the agreement adopted in Seville. So in this regard, Peru, as vice chair of Regional Conference on South-South Cooperation of ECLAC, we have already proposed this initiative. So we actively encourage other UN regional commissions to promote it. And also I want to highlight that the Seville commitment recognizes the importance and the need to establish a multidimensional index for measuring development. And that new index must be able to complement per capita income, and it should take into account the differentiated gaps and inequalities faced by different developing countries. Of course, upper middle income countries like Peru have provided technical cooperation and assistance, but still, we face many development challenges. Therefore, we should jointly mobilize innovative financing mechanisms for development. And, in particular, that should be done in the areas like digital transformation and artificial intelligence, including South-South and triangular cooperation. In this context, it's time for us to implement the four principles of effectiveness to ensure that international cooperation responds to the priorities of developing countries. So, on the occasion of the Seville commitment, we should revalue South-South and triangular cooperation, and we need to make sure that their qualitative and transformative and innovative contribution to sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation and sharing Peruvian experiences and also best practices. Actually, that could provide some sort of transferability to other cases of South-South and triangular cooperation. Also, you clearly show the commitment to the Sevilla and also highlighted the importance of multidimensional index. Actually, the concept of development itself is indeed multidimensional, and historically, the UNDP also has developed, different type of, indexes, including, HDI, etc. So I think we can also learn from our next speaker, Tim Strawson from UNDP. So join me to welcoming to Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you to the Government of Korea and to KOICA for hosting this great event and for inviting me to say a few words. I'm going to speak about these integrated national financing frameworks for mobilizing and effectively utilizing development finance and some of the experiences that we see at the country level. I'm going to say a bit, first of all, just explaining a bit about this concept of an integrated national financing framework, and then something of what we see at the country level, and perhaps with a few reflections of what it means for the conversation around development effectiveness. So to start briefly, for anyone who's not familiar with this concept of an integrated national financing framework, it's a concept that's being used by governments, primarily ministries of finance, ministries of planning, at the country level, embedded in their planning systems to connect really the aspirations of national sustainable development plans with the policy toolkit, the financing policy toolkit that governments have at their disposal. So many countries have a 5-year plan where they've localized the SDGs. They're talking about over 5 years or longer national sustainable development priorities. And we know that achieving those aspirations requires a large and diverse mix of public and private investments. We also know that government has a range of toolkits, a range of policies, instruments, regulations, a diverse financing toolkit at its disposal to mobilize and invest public finance, to incentivize, unlock, to regulate the way that private investment is made and can contribute towards those sustainable development aspirations. But I think what we've seen in many countries historically is that there's a disconnect between those aspirations and the financing policies and the contributions that different forms of finance can make towards those sustainable development aspirations. There was a study done in 2019, it looked at more than 100 national development plans and found that fewer than 30% of those were costed and had any kind of financing strategy. And where there was a financing strategy, it was primarily concerned with public finance and didn't consider the full range of public and private resources that could contribute towards sustainable development plans. And that's really the gap and the space that this integrated national financing framework concept fits into. An integrated national financing framework is something that ministries of finance can use alongside and with actors across government and partners to first connect their financing policy toolkit with the sustainable, the social, economic, environmental dimensions of their sustainable development plans, that vertical integration. It can use it to manage the synergies and the trade-offs horizontally between policy areas governing public and private finance, and to build integration and collaboration across public and private actors, and really in a way that brings the full policy toolkit for public finance, revenue, budget, debt, for private finance, for investment, for financial markets, into alignment and coherence with and behind national sustainable development visions in connection with the planning system. And so that's the concept. It's a concept that was introduced by member states in the 2015 Addis Ababa Action Agenda. We've obviously just had, as we've heard a lot about today already, the 4th Financing for Development Conference, and we saw member states not only renew their commitment to integrated national financing frameworks, but greatly expand it. It's, I think I'm right in saying it's the most frequently referenced initiative, if we can call it that, in the Compromiso de Sevilla, and it's there at the center of the financing framework with a real emphasis on country leadership behind implementation of the FFD outcome, but also recognized as a catalyst for making finance work for sustainable development outcomes across public finance, across private business, across FDI, across development cooperation, and the role that it can play in strengthening monitoring and follow-up, both domestically and internationally. And we've heard a lot about the Sevilla Platform for Action. It's a concept that features in many SPA initiatives. So it's a brief introduction to the concept of an INFF. When we look at progress and how this is being used by countries around the world, we see that 86 countries to date are using this INFF approach at different stages and in different ways, embedded within their national processes and national planning systems, typically led by the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Planning, but involving a wide range of actors from across government and across the public and private sectors. Among those 86 countries, we see that more than 65 are already implementing or have implemented reforms that have been shaped by public and private, reforms that have been shaped through the INFF process. And more than 25, in fact closer to 30 countries now, have operationalized a financing strategy that sits in that gap between aspirations and the full financing policy toolkit that I pointed to earlier. When we look across that implementation, we see across those 65 countries, we do at UNDP an annual INFF survey. The most recent results found that more than 200 reforms are being implemented. And I won't go into this chart, but it shows the spread of reforms that are being delivered across the public and private financing landscape. The main point being that I think we are really seeing governments use this with their partners to build a more holistic approach to financing and connecting these different areas of financing policy with sustainable development plans and the outcomes there, both in public finance, tax and budgeting, but also increasingly across blended finance, across the real economy, across the financial markets, as well as other forms of financing, philanthropy, remittances, diaspora, faith-based financing and the like. To give a few examples of what that looks like in practice, on the public finance side, we've seen more than 30 countries within their RNFF approach take steps to better align the budget process at different stages, from the call for proposals, the design of programming, the implementation, the monitoring, better align the budget processes with the SDGs, with the outcomes of their national sustainable development plans, but also to look holistically across public finance as a whole and to think about fiscal policy coherence. So in regard to priorities like gender equality, for example, many countries have and have had for some time a gender responsive budgeting system of some kind, but perhaps the gender burden of tax policy is less well understood. So it's a framework that helps governments look at those in tandem and say, are we coherent across our expenditure and our revenue policy and our tax policy? Are we creating incentives that are making finance work for gender equality or for environmental objectives, for nature and the like? We're also seeing countries innovate in instruments and tax policy reforms to leverage mobilize new forms of domestic revenue or use innovative debt instruments. Benin, for example, was the first LDC to issue an SDG bond, raising more than $500 million for investment in the SDGs, and has since issued SDG-linked loans. On the private finance side, we see again countries using the approach to put forwards interventions that will build pipelines, build country platforms that are mobilizing investment in SDG-aligned investment opportunity areas, but also building sustainability into the architecture of financial markets. And many countries within the framework of their RNFF are prioritizing sustainability disclosure, prioritizing the implementation of green or sustainable finance taxonomies. And we've been working as UNDP with Thailand, who recently the SEC issued some guidance on SDG-based sustainability reporting for listed firms with a combined market capitalization of more than $90 billion, which speaks to something of the potential. And when we looked at these RNFFs, I mentioned the 86 countries and the 65 that are already implementing reforms. When we took a closer look at the most advanced of those, where they've already delivered reforms and we see quantifiable outcomes, we found across just 17 countries that already there's $16 billion of new finance leveraged, $32 billion of existing finance that is better aligned to the SDGs. And that really is the tip of the iceberg. We see across those 200 plus reforms a growing portfolio and body of work to make finance work and reconfigure financing policies, to introduce new instruments that will make finance work at the country level for sustainable development outcomes. But beyond just the transactions, also steps to strengthen institutions, both for managing and coordinating this holistic approach to public and private finance for sustainable development, but also to strengthening processes and capacities to make individual policy areas work for financing. And one example of that is Uzbekistan, where the government has been expanding its citizen budget and participatory budgeting at the district level, and has brought in a dedicated focus on SDG budgeting into its annual budget statement and budget publications. So I'll give a quick overview just of 3 countries and what this looks like at the country level. So Mongolia was one of the first countries to launch its RNFF and its financing strategy. It spoke to both the medium-term development plan, which has a $15 billion cost estimate associated with it, and the long-term Mongolia Vision 2050. What we saw Mongolia do was identify 30 specific financing reforms that would help mobilize and unlock and align financing with those financing needs. And to date, we've seen a scaled up pilot of SDG budgeting reforms across 4 or 5 ministries that's now aligned close to $1 billion of annual public expenditure with the SDGs, and that number is growing year on year. But also on the private sector side, working with the stock exchange and with the central bank to adopt sustainability reporting standards for a market of $3 billion, to establish the world's second SDG finance taxonomy, and then to create incentives within monetary policy to channel investments towards greener and more sustainable investments in the domestic banking market in particular. And there's a target to move from 2% of domestic banking portfolio being invested in green investments to 10%. So that's Mongolia. In Nigeria, who launched their financing strategy in 2022, we saw that the financing strategy was a way of bringing together the medium-term expenditure framework, the medium-term revenue strategy, and a range of reforms across private financing. Nigeria has a relatively low tax to GDP ratio, and there's been a lot of work catalyzed around raising that ratio. We've seen some initial impacts already as a result of some auditing improvements in sectors like oil and gas, but also there are 4 tax bills going through Parliament now that are targeted at really raising that tax to GDP ratio. And on the private finance side, a number of reforms and interventions designed, for example, to promote SDG-aligned investments. There's a $175 million SDG pipeline for women and youth-led impact ventures that's achieved a lot of transactions and investment already, and that has seeded the development now of a $1 billion wholesale impact investment funds that is being taken up moving forwards. And the approach, as it's been taken forwards at the national level, has also seeded the adoption of this INFF approach by some of the states in Nigeria. There are 6 states that have progressed with this, and we've seen, for example, Gombe State in the north be the first state to issue a subnational green bond in Nigeria. A final country example is from the Maldives, who launched their gender-responsive climate financing strategy a couple of years ago. In Maldives, this is designed to support both the Strategic Action Plan, but also the country's NDC, the Nationally Determined Contributions to the Paris Agreement. And there's a $1.5 billion climate investment gap. And this financing strategy was designed both to support the mobilization of capital to meet that gap, but also to support the wider transition of the economy from being a fossil fuel-based economy to a more sustainable economic and financial model where climate risk in particular was built into the architecture. And what we've seen the government progress since the launch of its financing strategy is the removal of fossil fuel subsidies, new laws to broaden the tax base, a number of innovations, particularly in the insurance sector, as well as project pipeline development, capacity building, a growth in investment projects, and an ESG framework with indicators focused on climate, focused on nature objectives, configured specifically for the Maldivian context, with an initial voluntary basis, but moving to mandatory reporting into the future. Those are three quick examples. I'm aware the time is short, so I hope I've given you a flavor of this INFF concept, how it's being used across a number of countries. And what we see is this approach can really be used to empower countries, is being used by countries to lead the development of sovereign financing strategies and financing frameworks, each of which are very unique. And so the final point that I'd like to make is, you know, when we did an analysis last year looking at a number of these financing strategies, what the focus was in terms of public, private, blended finance, in terms of objectives regarding leveraging new capital or aligning finance with sustainable development results for better SDG outcomes, or some combination of the two. And what we see is there's really a unique configuration of policy reforms, policy priorities in each of these financing strategies. So when we come to the question of development effectiveness, which is a big topic of the conversation this week, and we think about things like country ownership, focus on results, inclusive partnerships, transparency and accountability, I think these integrated national financing frameworks must be a key part of the foundation for what that looks like at the country level. These INFFs represent sovereign financing frameworks. They bring a very strong focus on results through the financing strategies and reforms that are being taken forwards. And they're built on this cross-government, but also multi-stakeholder approach, built on an understanding and transparency around the data and trends across the financing landscape, and partnerships and conversations around that. So I'll close just by quickly referencing our INFF facility. So I'm speaking from UNDP, but UNDP is also part of this INFF facility, which brings together UNDESA, the OECD, UNICEF with the EU, Italy, Sweden, Spain, and Canada has recently announced that they will join. And this is a vehicle really for responding to the demand for technical support from ministries of finance and countries that are using the approach, but I think can also be a basis for thinking about development effectiveness and how we can work with development partners to respond to and to align with the sovereign financing priorities that INFF represents. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. Right. So you know, at the end of the talk, you highlighted the importance of data sharing and also monitoring and following up the financial flows, and you clearly shows these visualization based on statistics, and that actually reminds me of the aid information management system, which has been implemented in developing countries and different contexts of developing countries, and aid data platforms for better transparency and better coordination, including different stakeholders. It's very important, but not so many platforms are successful, because when you actually implement this kind of technology or platforms in government, there are a lot of challenges, including social, technical, and cultural manner. But at the same time, we are living in the kind of emergence of the artificial intelligence and natural language processing for analyzing the unstructured data, and sometimes we utilize the remote sensing data. So that actually can lead for the better technology utilization for the aid targeting and also tracking the finance for better effectiveness. All right, so I'd like to invite our final speakers, Chris. So we're going to learn from a little bit different perspective. So from the finance sector. So podium is yours.
Thank you very much. So my name is Chris Clubb. I'm from a group called Convergence Blended Finance, and we're just dedicated to one thing. How do we use good practice blended finance to increase the amount of investment in these 142 low and middle income countries, where that investment will really finance SDG and climate project? That's all we do. We've existed for 10 years. Listen, I want to start with a level of excitement from my perspective. I have been financing projects, climate and SDG, in low and middle income countries for 31 years. And never before in my career have I been more excited about the future than now. The reason being, we had a monumental shift in Sevilla realized. For the very first time, developed countries and developing countries came together, and if we look up there, catalyzing financing for development, they had a very, very substantial negotiation and a very important agreement on the importance of catalyzing financing for development. One of the benefits we have is we have systemically under-delivered and underperformed on mobilizing private investment. And now that this agreement is upon us in an event like today, we really need to be identifying how do we move forward. And I'm going to start with 5 high-level points and then go through this deck. And this deck's available on page 93 in your book. Number 1, the Financing for Development document is the very first time that developed countries and developing countries have agreed a lot of really meaty, tangible content language about the importance of blended finance, not just as a tool, but standards of blended finance, like ensuring that it is led by country priorities, that it's sustainable finance, that it's done at scale and it's standardized. This is very, very important. I've been involved in blended finance for the last 10 years. And we've never had a level of agreement like that amongst developed and developing countries. The second is, there are today $482 trillion of global financial assets, estimated by the Financial Stability Board, around 88% controlled by the private sector. But only 4.5% of that is actually invested in the 141 developing countries once we exclude China. So there's lots and lots of money in the global system, around 4.6 times global GDP. They're just systemically not in the countries we want to get it into. Indeed, if we look on cross-border net flows, it's only around 100 to 150 billion a year. So big picture, there's lots of private investment out there. It's systemically not invested in our countries. And how do we actually get it into these 141 countries that we're interested in? Third issue is really the money's not there. I engage with private investors all the time. And the first barometer that they look at is country risk, credit risk. And Moody's, S&P, and Fitch rate 94 of these countries. And 76% of these countries are rated B or lower. And the median is B minus. What that really means for most global north investors is the perception of risk in these markets means they're not investing systemically. They're keeping invested in developed countries. The fourth message I want to leave with you is, for the past decade, we've had lots and lots of trial and experimentation about blended finance to mobilize investment. Okay, what we're really trying to do is mobilize on a cross-border basis investment to good projects that just happen to be located in countries where the perceived investment risk is high. So if we can be, through blended finance approaches and structures, alter the risk-return profile, we've demonstrated really strongly that private investors are prepared to invest into markets over the last decade. The problem is we've had lots of trial and experimentation. In our database, over 1,500 individual blended finance transactions. What we have not done, we have not had an agreement between developed and developing countries as to what are the most effective and efficient approaches. I'm really glad to see we've got Norway here. Norway's been a strong leader in this over the last couple of years. We've got Peru and we've got Mexico, two really important developing countries. We need to have those three as representative of high-income countries and developing countries to look back on this last decade of activity and come together and agree, we have a lot of experimentation, but what has been the most effective and efficient ways to have actually mobilized private investment? We don't need much more innovation. We need to standardize and scale those that they collectively decide have worked successfully. We've had lots of experimentations. It's up to them as developed countries and developing countries to agree these are the most effective and efficient ways. So the fifth thing I want to leave you is, ever since the Sevilla outcome document came out, and a Sevilla platform for action, ourselves, the OECD, and several other countries and organizations are leading. How do we agree an action plan to take the high-level language of the outcome document to put it into action, tangible activities that will result in boosting private investment mobilization? Based on our analysis and our work over the last year, we think we can increase private investment mobilization from around 70 billion a year to around 550 billion a year, using the existing resources in the system more strategically and collaboratively in the best blended finance models. So that's why I'm excited. For the very first time in Sevilla, the countries have come together and said, hey, we need to really professionalize, scale, standardize blended finance to mobilize that $482 trillion of investment. People say it's sitting on the sidelines. It's not. It's invested in developed markets. It's our job through blended finance to mobilize and catalyze that investment into low and middle income countries, and it's been done. And how do we move forward at scale? So with that, I'm going to walk through some statistics. I encourage you to actually read clause 33 of the outcome document. It's the main clause about private investment. It's not just about quality, it's a lot about quality. For example, we need to get a lot more equity, and we need to get a lot more affordable sovereign debt into these markets in order for us to have sustainable finance from a development perspective. Once again, sadly, there's a lot of global financial assets. It's just asymmetrically distributed into markets away from where we want it to be. If we want this funding to flow into the 142 low and middle income countries, we really need to think about that word catalyze and mobilize. Investors are more than content to remain invested in developed countries, and they will remain there unless we strategically decide how do we create an investment opportunity that will meet their fiduciary and regulatory obligations, and therefore how do we mobilize them there. If we look at the OECD data that Julie actually had walked through, and we look at, well, who is mobilizing most of the private investment so far? Okay, what you'll see here is that the multilateral development banks have been most active, and it's only been flowing into the private sector. We need to have more mobilization from more actors, including flowing to the public sector moving forward. At 57 billion or thereabouts average over the last 5 years, that's less than 1% of the SDG investment needs so far. Big picture, because developing countries and developed countries had not agreed, for example, in Addis Ababa, there wasn't much discussion about blended finance and mobilization. I'm going to be honest, blended finance and mobilization has been a secondary and sadly a tertiary activity for almost all development organizations. We need to use the outcome document from Sevilla to change mobilization and blended finance towards best practices. Once again, this is our biggest challenge. Got a lot of great projects, a lot of great businesses, a lot of great sovereign projects that should be implemented. They're just not funded. And the primary reason why they're not funded by the private sector looks at these ratings from Moody's, S&P, and Fitch and says, I'll remain invested in developed markets because it doesn't meet their fiduciary and regulatory obligations. Lots of blended finance transactions have created investments that do meet their fiduciary and regulatory obligations. Here's the main content from the outcome document that talks a lot about blended finance and mobilization. I encourage you to come to our website. We have a lot more content on there. So we at Convergence worked with the OECD, UN Economic Commission for Africa, UN Capital Development Fund, and the GISD Alliance, led by DESA, and several developed and developing countries. And we put forward one of these Sevilla Platform for Action initiatives. It's a joint initiative, and these organizations or countries are going to work over the next 12 months to take the high-level language of mobilization and blended finance in the outcome document to translate it into a very tangible action plan. So developing countries and developed countries will come together. They'll agree that this is the most appropriate action plan for us to collectively be mobilizing private investment. And in it, it'll be very clear, agreed amongst themselves, what types of things the government of Mexico should be doing, the government of Peru should be doing, the government of Norway should be doing, because they will agree amongst themselves, that they will agree based on the evidence that this is the most effective and efficient way for us to professionalize mobilization and mobilize at scale. We at Convergence have been funded for the last 2 years by the Gates Foundation and others to do a lot of work leading up to the Sevilla document under the idea if we wanted to mobilize private investment at scale using scarce public sector resources, how would we go about doing it? And on our website, you can read this document. It really describes 4 key components of what will need to be done if we want to be mobilizing private investment at scale. And standardization of blended finance solutions is being talked about all over the world. And we have looked at the last decade of blended finance activity. There's around 1,500 to 2,000 transactions. We've engaged with all global private investors, whether they're global north insurance companies, pension companies, sovereign wealth funds, commercial banks in developing countries. We've tried to basically identify this question. If we wanted to standardize blended finance solutions that would mobilize domestic investors and cross-border investors, we can't standardize in 30 or 40 different solutions. We've engaged broadly, and there's been a collective agreement if we could standardize in 12 different models, and FASA was one of those particular models. If we could standardize in 12 models in addressing 4 of the key systemic issues that investors face. Number 1, and in the first column there, increase the number of viable projects. Everybody says there's not enough viable projects in emerging markets. Great. Then what's our blended finance solution? And we've identified 2 of them to increase the number of viable projects in the private sector and the public sector. Investors can only invest in viable projects. If we can't show investors viable projects, they will remain invested in developed markets. We need to boost viable projects. The second is, everyone agrees that we need to boost project-level investability. Many viable projects will still not be seen as investable. What can we do at a project level through blended finance that would allow an investor to look at the project and say, thanks to this blended finance intervention, I can now invest in this particular project. This is great. Now we have viable and investable projects. But for us, most of the money sits in the global north. Most of the money sits in Global North pension funds, commercial banks, investment funds. They are not going to be in Kenya, they're not going to be in Peru, looking for an individual project to be investing in. They're more interested in portfolio level solutions. Can I invest in a fund, and a fund manager will then go and invest debt or equity into these viable and investable projects. And we've identified 3 different models that could be standardized at a portfolio level. And the fourth is obviously dealing with FX risk. Sadly today, most development finance still is in the form of hard currency debt. It jeopardizes debt sustainability. We need to transform as much of this cross-border financing and domestic financing into local currency debt, affordable sovereign debt, and equity. If we continue upon this path and we boost investment through US dollars, we're just kicking the can down the road until a debt crisis unfolds. I've got a lot more presentation here in the deck, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to end it here. So once again, I really want to summarize that we have 10 years of history in blended finance and mobilization. And now that we have the new Financing for Development 4 outcome document that says we need to really boost blended finance and boost private investment mobilization, how do developed and developing countries come together, collaborate, and learn from that decade? Because we've had so much innovation. What we do not have is an agreement of what's worked well and how do developed and developing countries collaborate using their own fiscal resources and governing their own respective development finance institutions to mobilize at scale. I deal every day with private investors. One of the benefits we have, they want to invest in these markets if the investment meets their fiduciary and regulatory obligations. And through blended finance, we create investments through risk reduction that meets their fiduciary and regulatory obligations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. You know, based on your extensive experiences in finance, I think you provided great strategies for implementing, you know, the mobility models, and also raised the critical questions how we should enact severe commitment and platforms on the ground, and also how should we, you know, standardize different models of development finance. We have 50 minutes to go. So I think I'll do my best to cover all these great points and also the questions from the audience as well. So maybe we can start from Anders. So I got one very important question. So connecting to the Chris, the previous presentation. So blended finance, it has a great potential, but at the same time, it's often criticized for being fragmented and also the small scale. And also connecting to this, the questions, to what extent could the FASA fund model be scaled up or applied to other sectors, such as renewable energy or health? Could you share your thoughts briefly?
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Blended finance has been criticized for being like small scale, and we have a big way to go there, and I think Chris actually touched upon a lot of that in his presentation, but I might not have like the answers there, but at least some thoughts. And one thing that I have observed is that we as donors, we like a lot of small like pilot projects, and we do a lot of projects, but we don't do so much at big scale, and that's what's missing. And I think maybe a little flaw in our own kind of own internal processes too is that we are often bound by these annual budgets that doesn't allow us to think 5, 10, 15 years ahead, and that makes it a bit challenging for us to do large, big-scale projects, but that is what's needed. So I think there's a lot of changes that needs to happen in our own kind of government ways as well. But also to this question too, up on the screen is the model that I presented, if that can be actually applied to other sectors. And the short answer to that is yes, absolutely. And it's mentioned renewable energy here. And in fact, something like this already exist in renewable energy, and we drew upon those type of inspiration to create a similar type of initiative for agriculture. And that is also to Chris's point too, and what is needed to also scale this up. Instead of like creating all these like new things, let's try to standardize and replicate and build on what's been working. And that's actually what we try to do with FASA. So we try to find what already worked in another sector. So, but absolutely, this can be a model that is replicated for other sectors as well, such as healthcare, which I know it does not actually exist for. Thanks.
Great. I'd like to continue this issue with Chris as well. And also, I'd like to address these issues like collectively. So, Chris, considering your extensive experiences in blended finance, could you provide a specific example of blended finance program you led that successfully managed risk sharing between the public and private sectors? And also, there's another very important questions. What are the key challenges or risks that discourage private sectors from investing in developing countries, and how can they be mitigated?
Yeah, so let me start with that second question. So in general, blended finance is trying to solve two problems. At a project level, how can we create a higher number of viable projects that an investor will look at and see, that's a viable project? And what can we do to reduce risk of an individual project? But much more important, because there's lots of good projects, lots of good companies, lots of good financial institutions that should be financed. More important is the whole country risk issue. A lot of great projects and companies do not receive financing on a cross-border basis simply because they happen to be located in a country that's rated single B, okay? It means that most cross-border debt investors are not going to be looking at a project level. They'll just say, I can't invest there. So the challenge for us to address country risk is we aggregate together, giving investors diversification, and in a blended finance fund like the FASA funds, we put public sector money in a junior position. This allows investors to get comfortable with a high country risk and ultimately get financing to flow into these particular markets. Now, in terms of good examples of blended finance, I would cite two very good ones. Okay, one in particular is the Africa Guarantee Fund. At the end of the day, we need to be stimulating commercial banks that are active in these countries. There's many commercial banks in 142 countries. We need to be supporting them to take more lending risk in their country to provide more financing to SMEs, as an example. So Africa Guarantee Fund has been capitalized by public sector funding. Africa Guarantee Fund goes to a commercial bank in Peru, it's Africa, so in Kenya, and says to the Kenyan bank, please go expand your loan portfolio. I will bear half of the risk of that loan portfolio. It's just focused on SMEs. And that's a brilliant example. And Africa Guarantee Fund is now active, I think, in 33 of the 54 countries, therefore expanding SME finance. Okay, on a cross-border basis, I think most investors would love to co-invest with multilateral development banks. Okay, IFC, which is a subsidiary of the World Bank Group, is the most active private sector lender amongst the MDBs. It created something called the MCPP Infrastructure Program, which attracted $1.5 billion of investment from AXA, Allianz, and Prudential. And that investment is co-investing with IFC in the senior loans that IFC is making. That happened because our colleagues in Sweden at SIDA were prepared to go into a junior position on that portfolio of loans. And as a result of that, investors, through diversification and subordination, we gave them what we need to give them. They modeled that as an investment grade risk. And as a result of that, we've got another 1.5 billion from AXA, Allianz, and Prudential channeled into clean infrastructure projects in emerging markets. And it only happened because SIDA was prepared to go in a junior position.
So you talked about SIDA, and then with that, how do you see the potential of the Korea or the Korean government in this sector?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think Korea, if I were to make a recommendation to the Korean government, as I said, there has been lots and lots of trial and experimentation in blended finance. What we do not have, and what we must have to be successful. How do we get Mexico, Peru, the Norways of the world together, and under the banner of blended finance and mobilization, say we think that these are the most effective approaches to mobilize private investment, and Mexico has comparative advantage to play role A in that, and Peru will do A primed in that, and Norway will do things. What we do not have is that. We cannot be successful until developed and developing countries agree that these are the most effective ways and these are the different roles that they'll undertake. I would highly encourage Korea, that as our representative from Mexico said, everyone looks at what Korea has achieved over the last 40 years, and they're almost astonished at that success. Therefore, it's a great bridge between developed countries and developing countries to bring together this level of collaboration. And that's what I would highly encourage Korea to think about doing.
Thank you. Wonderful discussion. So then let's move to the little bit more understanding the contextual practices from Mexico and Peru. So to Alejandra, what kind of for example, like your innovative financing mechanism do you have? You talked about the massive arrival of the sargassum. And also, I also have one specific questions to make a balance in terms of challenge. So you have a potential, and also what are the key challenges faced during the implementation of the MICTA circular cooperation projects? Could you?
I think, well, thank you, Chris, because it's very important that you said, I think Mexico, an upper middle income country, have two kinds of cooperation, to receive cooperation and give cooperation. And now I think like the donors, we are like one person. It's like the cooperated country. For example, with MICTA. MICTA is a very good example because we have Australia put no money, put all the incomes about the school. Mexico puts all the money for build the school. Korea puts all the knowledge of the new to being a green school, and this kind of cooperation projects give us the very good thing to explain that they made it social benefits, but also the projects can be strengthening local economies. For example, this school strengthen the economy, the local, the livelihoods, and contribute to resilience and to the achievement of the 2030 agenda. I think that this MICTA project challenged Mexico to innovate a new cooperation, to show the world that Mexico can do things about the good things, not a lot of projects that you said. We need to do cosas que funcionen. Lo que funcione, hay que hacerlo. Mucho dinero en muchos proyectos se diluye. Así es que poco dinero en proyectos efectivos da buenos resultados.
Thank you very much. Right. So, Noela, we have two very insightful questions also about Peruvian experiences. So, what lessons from Peru's experience could be applied to other developing countries seeking to strengthen their development finance through similar cooperation frameworks? Also, we always need to have a balance. So, what are the biggest challenges in coordinating with various international partners? And what strategies are being used to overcome them? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Once again, thank you very much for your questions. And in my opinion, what matters the most is having a clear understanding of development goals. You need to have a better understanding of goals of development cooperation because countries have different priorities. But we need to make sure that those priorities should provide the way for us to take forward. In that regard, we put more emphasis on South-South cooperation. So because we know and understand well, and we respect each country's objectives and goals, and we do not force other countries to do what we need to do. So we need to go together, work together, and we need to pursue changes together. And at the same time, in terms of projects, there's many important aspects. As a donor country, we can provide some assistance for projects. But donors can learn lessons from recipient countries, partner countries, through ODA projects. This is what we should understand well and know well, in particular in terms of ODA. So this is what I'd like to highlight again and again. So with that in mind, I believe our South-South cooperation projects have been growing a lot because we understand well about what other countries need and want, and we want to work together with them. We want to grow them. We want to grow with them, and generating synergy is important. For successful cooperation, there must be synergy between the two countries, or through triangular cooperation, upper middle income countries like Peru and Mexico, if we can work together, then we can do more successful projects.
Thank you very much, Noela. Also you shared about the many examples of technological assistance and then technological cooperation as well. But given that we're living in the very competitive environment, so technology is not neutral. So I think I'd like to ask the related questions to teams. With rising humanitarian needs due to geopolitical tensions and climate change, how should Korea ODA balance immediate humanitarian assistance and long-term development investment, and also how we can actually align their national budgets with SDGs given this kind of difficult times? Tim?
Great. Well, those are two very good and quite deep questions. Maybe to start with the latter. I think what we're seeing countries use the RNFF approach to do is really take a holistic look across the financing landscape and look at what's known about the development results that different forms of financing are contributing towards, and look at what's known and what's not known, and how much do we know about the way that the budget and other forms of financing are contributing towards those economic, environmental, social outcomes of national sustainable development plans. And the budget is such a central tool in the financing landscape overall that it really prompts the question for how can we dig deeper into that. When we want to take a development outcome focused approach to financing, we need to be able to really understand and manage the way that we as government are using our own sources of financing to contribute towards those development outcomes if we want to catalyse other actors in that space. So I think first and foremost it puts that topic right at the center of the conversation. And these are, these financing strategies, these are national conversations. They involve actors from across not only across government, but across many partners, the private sector. So I think it first and foremost puts that conversation right at the heart. And then it enables the Ministry of Finance with the line ministries to, we see it very often catalyzing a very focused conversation to look at the budget process in its entirety, from the call for proposals to the design and implementation of programs, to the way that those are monitored, both by the line ministries, but also scrutinized by Parliament, by civil society and other actors. And to look at the entry points in that budget cycle, and there are many entry points for connecting that utilization of public finance with sustainable development outcomes, and in different ways, in different contexts. It's a principle that can be applied to a whole range of public financial management systems with varying degrees of sophistication, varying degrees of granularity in terms of the data that may be available. The first question is a very complicated one. I think, and in the interest of time, maybe I won't go into too much detail, but and I can see Chris wants to come in. But I think there's obviously rising short-term needs at the moment across humanitarian, across climate change. We know that the triple planetary crisis is accelerating in all of its dimensions. But I think we must, as we respond to those short-term crisis needs, we must also lay the foundations for longer-term change. There are many countries that have been stuck in very long periods of short-term crisis because we haven't been able to find that balance. So for Korea, but also for many other donors and partners, it's very important to find that balance.
Sure. Back to you, Chris.
I just want to address that first issue about the quantity. Listen, the most important use of official development assistance is actually to support countries implement the projects they want to be doing, and it needs to be in the form of traditional ODA, okay? So we need to think that there's three big sources of public sector funding that could be deployed in blended finance mobilization. First off, we've put $500 billion on the balance sheets of multilateral development banks. As we sit here today, 1.5% of that capital is used to reduce risk and mobilize, okay? If that continues, we'll get nowhere in mobilization. In our view, if we could get 1/3 of the capital on the balance sheets of the multilateral development banks, 1/3 of $500 billion towards risk reduction and mobilization, that's component one. Component two, 7.5% of everyone's ODA every year going towards mobilization, ensuring the other 92.5% of ODA does not go towards mobilization, goes to the traditional needs of the Peru, the Mexicos of the world, and 0.05% of the GDP of developing countries. You mix those three together, our model suggests we can move mobilization from around 70 billion a year to 600 billion a year, okay? But you need those three pools of funding to make this work. The biggest is the 500 billion we've already put, it's already existing on the balance sheets of the MDBs. Literally 1.5% of it at all is used to reduce risk and mobilize. The other 98.5% is used for other purposes.
All right, thank you so much. So it's a very insightful, informative and comprehensive discussion. I have to confess, this is really difficult to manage, juggle, selecting the questions and reading all the questions from you guys. And then my apologies if your questions are not selected. But I think, hopefully maybe this is not the end because, Sevilla commitment has just started. And also we really look forward to further collaboration, to work together and then to implement this kind of international commitment on the ground. That's kind of one of the most important part. So thank you so much. Huge thanks to our panelists. So let's give a round of big applause. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Moderator and speakers are bringing such amazing depth of knowledge and unique perspectives to our discussion today. Thank you once again. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we can use a 15-minute coffee break to cool things off a bit. Once again, coffee and refreshments are prepared out in the lobby, so please do enjoy. And we are quite running a bit behind schedule, so we'll resume right here back at 3:05. So once again, please come back at 3:05. Thank you, and please enjoy your break.